What's up, everybody? Hope you're doing well. Today we are discussing a pretty interesting topic. We're going to be discussing Monster Hunter history and the history of the franchise being ass and dying multiple times, and how each generation is worse than the next while simultaneously being better than the previous one. And I've got a very special guest here today. We have Alpha Divine, also known as mhwilds. Please follow his YouTube channel. This man has been around the block in the Monster Hunter community for quite some time and has sunk his teeth into Monster Hunter way back in the geriatric days. Alpha, do you want to tell a little bit about yourself, how you got your start in Monster Hunter and what all you've played?
Yeah, so I've been playing since Monster Hunter Freedom Unite on the PSP. I was aware of Monster Hunter Freedom and Monster Hunter Freedom 2. It took a long time for my friends to convince me to play the series. And since then I've played every, well, I guess starting I played every Western release up until Monster Hunter World. Actually, a little bit before then, in 3rd or 4th generation, I started importing games from Japan. And it's fun. I have a channel that's kind of focused on just showcasing different parts of the Monster Hunter series and doing some research on some of the games.
Hell yeah. Okay. Which Monster Hunters are your favorite?
So I'm a huge 2nd generation fan, which isn't particularly common. I know that a lot of people really got their start in Monster Hunter World, and 3rd and 4th gen tends to be more of the core audience of what most people would consider old heads. It's not to say that I don't like every generation of Monster Hunter. The goal of the channel is to kind of bring people, at least my channel in particular, is to bring people into different games than they would otherwise play on their own. I think every game has its strong points and weak points, and they're all worth playing, but not everyone. How do I describe this? Some of them have added barriers to entry, and not everyone's going to get the appeal of each one, and that's fine too.
Naturally, yeah. Kind of like just Monster Hunter DOS in its entirety, right? Shout out to Looney.
I mean, it depends on what avenue you find the Monster Hunter games, right? Like if your expectations of the game, whatever game it may be, whether it be Monster Hunter 1 or Monster Hunter Wilds, if your expectations of the game aren't aligning with what the game actually is, you're gonna run into some frustration points that might make or break it for you. Whereas, how to describe it? If you go in with the right mindset, I think you enjoy every Monster Hunter game, including the first one. They're just different.
Yeah, and you know what? I think this is a perfect segue into the topic of the video, and what we're going to be going over and hit at the heart of is that Monster Hunter. You know, there's a lot of rhetoric in general, and it's been happening over and over again. Basically, every entry in New Gen is the concept of Monster Hunter losing its identity, or mass casualization, causing a soul. You know, like basically the soul being ripped out of Monster Hunter, all these different aspects. But Monster Hunter, you know, you lived through the era and you got to witness the era where Monster Hunter already shifted identities in a very large way. And I find that to be very interesting because, you know, like you said, a lot of the core, like old head audience is that 3rd and 4th gen. But it's kind of like the 1st and 2nd gen, most of the time, other than Freedom Unite, people are like, you can just ignore those. You can just ignore 1G and DOS.
It's kind of unfortunate. Freedom Unite occupies a very similar space to Generations Ultimate, in my opinion. And that doesn't mean, like, I'm not trying to bash Freedom Unite, I'm not trying to bash Generations Ultimate, but the community sentiment, at least here in the West, tends to be you will get everything out of playing Freedom Unite and playing Generations Ultimate that you would from most, if not all, of the games that came before it, and it adds on extra stuff, which is not the case. But it tends to be like that tends to be a particular talking point that gets brought up all the time.
That is true. Like the classic advice of, oh, you want to dabble into old gen Monster Hunter, play Freedom Unite or Gen U. I've definitely heard that a lot.
Yeah, and it's not to say, again, I don't find the games to be bad. Freedom Unite's probably in a 3-way tie with the rest of Gen 2 is my favorite game. It's where I started, and so I have a lot of, like, if there was a game that I have nostalgia for, it's certainly Freedom Unite, and it's difficult to account for that, like, when evaluating between games, like how much that plays a role. But again, it's fine to start with one of those games. I'm not trying to diminish somebody's personal journey going through Monster Hunter, but at the same time, like that talking point of, hey, you can just play these and you're effectively, there's nothing else to experience. That's just, it's just not true.
Yeah. I mean, I'm definitely like experiencing that myself a little bit right now. Having started in New Gen with World on launch, playing Generations Ultimate, then Rise, then Sunbreak, then more Generations Ultimate, then Wilds. Now I'm playing For You. Yeah. Yep. Playing For You. I'm a little bit into High Rank Village. Just fought Monoblos for the first time ever. And here I am like trying to fight it at first like it's just a Diablos offshoot, but it really is very different. And I'd always thought it was just a Diablos with one horn because I never bothered, looking up gameplay against it.
It's funny that you mention it that way because the structure of the first game that I played, obviously you fought Monoblos first. So for me, Diablos has always been Monoblos with 2 horns.
Yeah, that's so funny.
It's the same thing with like what is it called? My friends when we're playing through Wilds and they're looking at returning monsters. They're like, oh, this is that monster from World. I'm like, yeah, I can see why you think it's from World, but it's older than World. But sure, we'll go with that for now, Yeah. Because that's how they just happen to, that's where they know it from and how they happen to relate to it.
Yeah, we're seeing so many different game series with that kind of like culture shift. Like as someone who's also entrenched in FromSoft games, hearing people call Estus flasks of Crimson Tears, it stabs my heart in a way that, like I don't want to admit.
That has happened. There's these certain conversations that come up again and again, and people don't really realize that there's been a foundation for these things before. And so it's all new to the new audience. But yeah, you encounter certain shifts and you're like, wait a minute. When did this happen? When did I become a part of the old audience?
Right? Oh man, yeah. And I feel like I'm in a particularly weird space. And that, I played the shit out of New Gen, like did everything. Fought everything there is to fight as far as TU monsters, grinding lands in Iceborne all the way up, participated in the Streamstone grind at launch and base world, grinded Rampage weapons in base Rise, made all my decorations that I needed to, waited for the 2 months to get Camilios, Teostra, Kushala, Sunbreak. I've done all 58 of the special investigations, hit AR 300, all these different things. Wilds, burning through that. Generations Ultimate, all 228 Deviant quests. I fought every single monster on the roster. I've made builds for all 14 weapons and even made Palicos and a Prowler. Like I've dug deep into all these different games that I've played, and now I'm starting to stretch into For You, and I plan on going like the whole mile. I plan on fighting the whole roster. I plan on getting to 140 guild quests, farming that. I plan on experiencing all these different aspects of it. And at some point I plan on going to Dose, playing Freedom Unite, and hopefully also playing 3U. I might play some other ones around there. Might go to 1 at some point, or just straight up Monster Hunter. I'm working backwards here, and I'm chipping away at this series. And a lot of people, their favorite Monster Hunter is their first one, or at least they have a lot of like nostalgia or bias towards their first one. Yeah. My first is World. And it's my least favorite.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've got a lot of new. I say newcomers. I've been a part of the PS2 Monster Hunter server before the Discord was created and before the servers were online. And so there are people who are new to the PS2 servers, and by new I mean like they weren't there from the beginning, who have been around, I guess, relatively for like it's been a number of years that some of them are administrators who started with Monster Hunter in the 5th generation primarily, and have gone back and despite having played 5th gen or a newer generation, happen to like Gen 1 more. And it's always interesting to me because it's so hard for me to convince even my friends who have played World to go back and try some of the other games. It's interesting to me that some people just arrive there on their own and then also happen to enjoy it more than the game they were introduced with, because that's totally not my experience. I was, granted, it took a number of games for my friends to be like, yeah, you should play this series, because I had a misconception about what Monster Hunter was. I thought it was a hack and slash game, which I mean kind of, but not really.
Yeah.
It's not. People keep describing it as a boss rush, but it's much more thoughtful than that in terms of like it relative, especially to when I first started playing. There's very few boss fights that are as well put together as what Monster Hunter has available. Ever since Monster Hunter started in 2004. It's just interesting because I was hooked from the start. And I don't really understand how people
yeah. The classic
how people have a different
classic veteran that bounced off their first one and then came back a gen or two later.
Yeah, I mean, I never touched Freedom or Freedom 2. I was just like, yeah, no, I'm not doing this. And then after some like strong arming, I was the one who stuck around with Freedom Unite long after my friends had stopped playing. They'd decided to play other games. And it's also just interesting for me on that end because you get a very different experience when you're playing solo from when you're playing multiplayer. And obviously I was introduced with them teaching me the ropes and all of a sudden like being like, all right, figure it out because we're not playing this anymore. Yeah, no, I think it's cool that that people resonate with a game that they, whether or not they originally resonated with the game they started with, but they end up really, really enjoying a game that they hadn't started with, or that's not similar to the one that they started with. Because all of Gen 2 is very similar. Not to say it's the same, but like foundationally, it's within the same generations. It's like liking Iceborne's gameplay versus World's gameplay. Like there's a difference there for sure. Or I guess World and Rise are in the same generation, but they're not exactly the same.
Yeah. Well, new gen had extreme rapid shifts over and over again. Like the most consistent that new gen has been with as far as like the combat goes was actually like Rise 2 Sunbreak in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think the development of Monster Hunter games in general has changed a lot since the 5th generation. Like normally when they do installments, or at least my standard of normally. So when I'm looking at the series, I'm not necessarily thinking of it in terms of years, but like the amount of time that elapsed, and part of the contributor to the amount of time that elapsed was making a PC port for World. But like if you took base World on console to the last update, which happened simultaneously in Iceborne for both World and for both PC and console. Like there's a really long time stretch where you could have fit multiple installments of different Monster Hunter games, and now you could chalk that up to like, hey, the technology, like pushing the technology further, you know, and having a more demanding game to develop for. It also just leads, like if you took the demo of World and compared it to Iceborne, it's going to be night and day.
Yeah.
In a very similar way that if you took Monster Hunter 1 and compared it to Try, it is pretty night and day between those two games.
Lots of big differences. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's technically considered the same generation. And I don't naturally think of it in terms of the year stretch. I usually look at it like, okay, well, Gen 1 ended with Freedom 1, Gen 2 ended with Freedom Unite, that sort of thought process. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, this should definitely be an interesting, not necessarily clash of outlooks, but, intermingling of outlooks for these time capsules we have unearthed here. A 10-year-old video about Monster Hunter Freedom Unite and Monster Hunter 3U and how Monster Hunter sucks now 10 years ago.
Yeah, Monster Hunter ended with 3U 10 years ago. I don't know if you guys got the memo, but it's over. You pack your bags up.
We arrived late to the party. Let's go ahead and get started on the video. I'll pause it. Let me know if you want me to pause it. If you have like a point or something you want to think about.
I'll let you know. Don't worry.
All right, sweet. Okay. I know you got a wealth of knowledge. We're talking like different. I know the damage formula.
Yeah, and there are going to be some
up.
really bizarre pauses. You're like, wait, we're pausing here. Yes, trust me, I will have a point for this. I've been given this thought. This video has stuck with me. I've been here since it started. There are 10 years.
You were here at the inception.
Ideas floating around. Anyway, yeah, go on.
All right, let's get into this. And also, funny enough, we'll get into the comments later. But there's people like commenting on it like a year ago, 4 years ago. Like there are 4 months ago, someone said this aged like fine wine and only seems to age well given how Wilds turns out. There we go again. These talking points are relevant to this day, and they're relevant to the history of Monster Hunter and the changes that Monster Hunter has already underwent. So let's dive in.
Now, you may have noticed this an attention-grabbing title, you observant little thing you. And to be fair, it is deliberately provocative. I don't think that Monster Hunter sucks in absolute terms now, but I do think it sucks compared to the second generation, which is when it hit a pinnacle in my opinion. But that, my opinion, is essentially the crux of this analysis. So while you may disagree with my premises and possibly my conclusions, I don't think you'll be able to disagree with my reasoning. My argument is essentially that the things that made Monster Hunter great are now diluted. So if you don't agree with what I think the core elements of the game are, then you'll obviously disagree with the conclusions I come to, and that's okay. We don't have to agree on everything. This analysis will tell you.
So just real quick, the terms diluted and the core elements of Monster Hunter, like these are debated things to this day. Now,
yeah, it's why it's so hard to like. Monster Hunter is a very simple title for a game, right? Like, what do you do in the game called Monster Hunter? You hunt monsters. But what that means to different people, hunting in particular, I mean, you would even think that the title monster would be self-explanatory, but if you look at like a monster like Magnamalo, there's a bunch of discussion on like its design, whether or not it fits or clashes with what we like the other monsters in the series. Hunting, does it involve tracking? To what extent? Like, would Monster Hunter now be considered a Monster Hunter game versus the mainline games?
Yeah.
It technically has all the fundamentals there, except now there's a health bar and you tap the screen and a bunch of things are shortcutted, and there's other missing elements there that the mainline is known for. But yeah, it's not a particularly simple. Describing the core is going to mean different things to different people. It's not going to be as simple as, oh, we all just agree on this, and yeah, things are getting better or things are getting worse.
Yeah, there's an ebb and flow. There were people debating about how in Rise hitting the mining ore one time, giving you all of the ore, was changing the core formula. And also the idea in World you didn't have to bring pickaxes. You just had them infinitely and infinite whetstones. Like all these different little things changing over time.
And it shows you that people care. Like the thing that I always take away from that is like, yeah, people very clearly cared about these elements. And so for them having it change, it's like, okay, well, you're removing this thing that I liked. At the same time, Monster Hunter is gonna it's just going to naturally change. It's trying to capture more people in general. And so expecting it to stagnate, I think it's a little unreasonable. It's not to say that like they couldn't have kept like a limited number of pickaxes or singular mining nodes, but it does clash with what the developers want for the series, at least as far as the current developers. Obviously, the future's undetermined. They could go back. Who knows?
Definitely, yeah. And like that whole like preparation aspect, there's a lot of debate across different aspects of it. But I guess we'll get to those roads when we get there. But I just wanted to this video is 10 years old, and if you just listen to it from the beginning, it already sounds like it was made yesterday. The dilution of mechanics, the changings of the core formula, this is if you're out there in the audience watching, there's going to be a lot of familiar points just with a different coat of paint on it. And, that's what I got Alpha here for, to help kind of interpret this geriatric speak, and how we could...
This old man at one point was a young man, just like all these young people.
Yeah, for all you young people out there, this old man I got here with me, that his world was Monster Hunter Freedom Unite.
Yeah. It was, there was a time where I wholeheartedly, not to say that I agreed with every single one of those points, but I kind of was in a similar mindset to where this video is at.
That's interesting.
And I get it. I get it when your series is changing and it's not going in the direction you want it to change. You're gonna bring up some points, and some of them are gonna be good points, and some of them are gonna be like, okay, yeah, sure.
All right.
What I think the core of the game is, they talk about where things have gone so dramatically wrong in the last 6 years since the release of Portable 2G, using examples from games without. It might even enunciate some of those little niggles you've had in the back of your mind about how the games are much less satisfying than they used to be. If you started with 3rd or 4th generation Monster Hunter, then most of this will be foreign to you and you won't understand the contrasts I'm making, especially about how things changed for the worse that you probably consider better hearing about them here. But that's easily explained, because as Johnny come lately to the series, you lack perspective and thus your opinion is worthless. I'm just kidding. I'm not kidding. Note that this analysis is
it's such a... I mean, he was setting himself up, it's clear.
Yeah, it's definitely a joke. It's definitely a joke. But not really. but not
yeah,
really.
It's funny because there are critiques of Rise and Wilds that have the same kind of joking undertone while also insulting their audience. It is an insult, let's be honest.
How in the world could you see this baby game made for babies is hard with it has no walls, no challenge, and you guys that like it like the slob. And it was the same thing with the world too. You guys don't understand with what they've done to casualize our beautiful game series.
I need my slow-paced Monster Hunter World gameplay.
They've made Rise so fast. even on that note, just as a quick aside, Iceborne, the Iceborne monsters had this reputation for being cracked out of their mind, being very fast, and they were they did that to make it so that they can keep up with the hunter. But then when I went back and I played GU, the G rank monsters are faster than master rank monsters in Iceborne. And playing through 4U right now, low rank Yang Garuga was faster than most things that I fought in master rank Iceborne. Hell, even a lot of shit from master rank Sunbreak.
Garuga's funny because I don't know if he does it in low rank, but he's got in 4U he's got a true combo, which very few monsters have true combos. But if you're not paying attention, or I should say, very few monsters post Gen 2 or maybe even 3, but post mid Gen 2 they started nerfing true combos. But Garuga does. He's one of them. I guess GU you've got if you get caught out by bloodbaths or
Oh yeah.
technically a true combo. Yeah.
And Rathalos has a roar. I just fought him recently in low rank. He has a roar that if he hits you with it, he throws the fireball right at his right under him.
Yep.
And that's a guaranteed hit.
That's been a while. Yeah, it's been in the series for a very long time.
Yeah, whenever he pulled that on me, I was like, oh wow, okay, I'm actually gonna have to dip into my own pots, because at that point I was barely going past first aid meds. I was just breezing through, but I was taking like confirmed damage from Rathalos, and I was like, okay, I gotta change my game plan a little bit.
Yep.
But yeah, this is a definitely like funny point, and it definitely echoes into the future even further. Like it's funny. 10 years ago, second gen guy, and we're hearing fifth gen guys say that to sixth gen guys. So, you know.
Also, I should provide this context for viewers who don't know who Maze is. Maze is a early gen speedrunner, who, as far as I'm aware, they actually did play Monster Hunter 1. I don't know to what extent they played Monster Hunter 1, but they're a Western player, and I'm pretty certain they didn't play the Japanese PS2 games. But they're coming at it from having some knowledge of Monster Hunter 1. I wouldn't describe it as complete knowledge, and then what knowledge a player at the time would have had based on Western resources and some pretty extensive gameplay of, like, I would say Monster Hunter Freedom 2, Freedom Unite. They did play Try. I do remember seeing a speedrun of that. Portable Third, and then 3U. So a sizable number of games, and probably a sizable number of, so they've been playing from 2004 to like 20. When did this video come out?
10 years ago, so it would have been 2015.
Yeah, click on the more real quick on the description. It should tell us the exact date. Oh,
there we go. 2014.
Yeah. So yeah, 10 years of playing Monster Hunter has gone into this, but there's misconceptions you can still have, especially when you don't have the same resources that the Japanese audience did. And not to say that the Japanese audience got everything right, because I've seen a lot. Anyway, we can continue. It's just important for you to recognize that when somebody is discussing older Monster Hunter games, don't take their word for everything that they're saying as being true. You can take it as, hey, they've had this experience, this is what they think. But we'll get into that a little bit later. There are a number of errors that get brought up. Gotcha.
A healthy amount of skepticism. Now, on that matter, actually, one thing that I just thought of that I find kind of interesting is, at this point, if someone who started at World, like me, and maybe I'd only played Rise or something, and I was discussing Monster Hunter at large in the big picture, I would be talking about such a small window of Monster Hunter. But one thing I think that's interesting about this video in particular is that at this point they would be talking about a much larger window of Monster Hunter, and that is currently stretching further and further and further. But as far as like seeing a bigger picture and seeing more Monster Hunter all around, the earlier you go, the more of a, like, I guess not necessarily overall understanding of Monster Hunter someone would have, but just they would have a bigger framework for understanding Monster Hunter at large than someone who started in a new gen. Because
changes also happened a whole lot faster than they happen currently in new gen. Not to say that, again, I'm not trying to insult the developers in terms of their productivity. They're working pretty dang hard. It's just harder to develop Monster Hunter.
Yeah.
But things were moving quite a bit in a way that they just don't.
True. You had portable games and mainline games just cranking out over and over again, it seemed. And each generation had like a lot. I think like third gen had like 4 different releases.
3 different games. So it's 3 games per till 4th generation. 4th generation would be the first generation to have 4 games, unless you include these really bizarre ports. So you have Monster Hunter G on the Wii, which kind of comes out, I think, was it? It might have been before Tri. I don't know the exact date, but it's around Tri, maybe between Tri and P3rd. I'm not entirely certain. You have a port of P3rd in HD on the PS3. I'm not necessarily counting those, but like the actual main installments, there's 3 in Gen 1, 3 in Gen 2, 3 in Gen 3, and then 4 in Gen 4.
Gotcha. And they're all like widely varied in a lot of ways. Like, I just recently learned that Portable 3rd, you don't have underwater combat. Like,
no. Yeah, they had to rework every single one of the underwater areas to accommodate that too.
Yeah, that was wild to me.
Yeah, it's they made some really interesting changes, and it's something that like you wouldn't get. How to describe this? We haven't had really a new gen returning area. It's kind of like if you took an intermission between Rise and Sunbreak and released a smaller game that was built off of. Yes, Rise is a portable game, but like yeah, like let's say you had a smaller game in between either Rise or Sunbreak or World or Iceborne that was very similar to the base game, but decided to remove like a core mechanic from it.
Yeah, the wire bugs.
No
just remove the wire bugs.
You know, like just take those out. You know,
switch skills. They just returned it back to worlds like combat.
We have to rework
Rise.
all the maps to make sure that there are no great wire bugs on them. All those traversal spots, they're gone. You know, like it'd be that level. Or like they had to rework if it was World to be like, okay, well, no more mantles, and you can't use the glider mantle to traverse the what's the name of that one place?
Ooh, and Slinger. You couldn't use the hook slinger to go up the Coral Highlands
like
Mountain.
That. Yeah.
That's nuts. I guess you're right. Yeah, they're while it is a smaller window, they did change things rapidly in a lot of ways, and like it was almost like they were machine gunning stuff out, whereas now they're taking their time, and it feels like the changes are much more significant, but it's just there's less games and more changes happening and like that we're aware of.
A similar series I like to point to all the time as a point of reference for Monster Hunter is Pokemon. In terms of like the games, not to say that Pokemon's necessarily attempted the same scope with their games, have kept things pretty conservative. But it's the same sort of, they had an installment every year and would eventually, like with the third game being like the expansion, you know, so like for Ruby and Sapphire, you had Emerald, Diamond, Pearl, you have Platinum. Those third games usually are like, you'd have a bundle of 2 games, which I would consider one. And then that third game being like the expanded version of, I shouldn't necessarily say expanded version, but like, it uses the base game and does something different with it.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, aside about, you know, big picture of Monster Hunter and Alpha making the big picture even looking like a even bigger picture, it's complex. It's complex for sure. Let's get back into the vid.
Centered on generations 1 through 3. I've done some work on analysing 4th generation from video footage online, but as I haven't played it yet, I've only had the evidence to go on rather than being able to do more controlled damage testing and number crunching. Firstly, I think the crux of the game, so the part that makes it great, is the personal development of the player in order to overcome a challenge. That's got a few parts to it. Let's have a look at those separately. Firstly, personal development. Monster Hunter is unusual in that your max HP and level sets essentially don't change from the second you start the game through to defeating the last boss. You can't grind levels to make fights relatively easier. If you face an unbeatable foe, you either need to get better at the game or go outside the game mechanics somehow, like by cheating, getting through things to gang up on the creature, or getting really lucky. You could give a newbie a complete game file and they'd still die on wrath loss. The second part of that statement is the challenge. This is more self-explanatory. Creatures don't roll over and die, and often quests are created for the sole purpose of challenging a player. I'm talking about the quests that exist for no other reason other than to be hard, like Mark of the Hero or Final Invitation. The game is designed to challenge the player, unlike most other modern games that will do everything in their power to get you to win.
Okay, pause it real quick.
As the premise,
so, Final Invitation and Mark of a Hero, there are some quests to kind of put this in your perspective that are successors to that type of quest that he's describing. The quests he's describing are usually quests like Monster Hunter, where you fight like multiple flagships in an arena, right? It might not be more than 2 at once. Usually it's like one after the other. But like, there were event quests in, usually it's in the portable games. It's not as common in, or it wasn't as common in the early console games to have, super, like, specifically tailored, super duper challenging event quests for the sake of having a challenging event quest. Not to say that there weren't events that were difficult. There were. But they didn't have as many like back-to-back monsters in like Monster Hunter 1, Monster Hunter G, and Monster Hunter 2.
Now hold on real quick. Did they ever have like parameters to increase their power similar to like advanced quests? Or were they just multi-monster?
So events typically don't have. So these were like the way events work in early Monster Hunters in the console games. They'd usually be on a rotation and they'd be given by the server, very similar to Wilds. So Monster Hunter 1, Monster Hunter G, Monster Hunter 2 have these rotating quests that rotated a particular number of days. For DOS, it was every 3 days there would be a set of 3. Or sorry, yeah, every 3 days there would be a set of 3. And it would cycle. It would go through it. Not necessarily. There's like a predetermined list if you follow the pattern. I did a lot of work researching. I do a lot of work researching for the Monster Hunter 2 server, and the official website, there is a repeating pattern, but it's a very long repeating pattern. But you'd have to wait for an event to rotate in that you wanted to do, and so like players would still play the base game, like you'd still do everything that the base game had, and the advanced quests you're talking about typically. I think those were introduced in Monster Hunter Tri, where you'd have a regular quest where you fought, like, let's say, Ludroth. And then there's, like, an advanced version, which has, on average, higher stats. They didn't usually beef up monsters based on... Like, they didn't usually have a separate quest with a more beefed up version. They would either have... Instead, they would have maybe an event with a stronger, different version, or, like, that would have 2 at a time. But it wasn't standard in rotation. And then the PSP games used to download the events. And you could have... I think it was 4 in Freedom Unite. Freedom didn't have any download. Base Freedom didn't have any download quests if you were playing the North American release, but that's because they reworked it in Japan. You used to be able to download quests, just like Freedom 2 and Freedom Unite. And you could access those events at any time, but it's the same thing. Like if you played right at launch, you would have to wait for those events to be implemented. Like they got rolled out over time. In a very similar way to like the way that Rise is structured. Rise didn't have all of its events, or Sunbreak didn't have all of its events on launch. They slowly rolled out these events that you could download and then store on your system. Now, granted, you can store a lot more events on your system. But long story short, what he's describing are usually those download quests. There are some that existed. So Freedom 2 and Freedom Unite had some really interesting unlock conditions. So do you remember Rainbow Pigment in World?
Yes, we had to do like
and
all
how
the
you unlock
optionals.
it? Yeah. So it's very similar to unlocking Rainbow Pigment or Kirin, that were for some of these extra challenging quests. But not every Monster Hunter game has had them before Freedom 2 and Freedom Unite, but he's more pointing towards those sorts of quests. The non-standard progression quests are the ones he's referring to when he's talking about
it's kind of like Pinnacle
challenges.
Yeah, like Pinnacle challenges kind of deal.
Yeah, in 4U you'll have some you'll encounter. I don't know to what degree you've seen of 4U, but yeah, there are some that you'll encounter in 4U as well, and there's some in GU. Like if you fought, I believe the quest is called Monster Hunter, where it's like fight a Rathalos, then fight I think like a Tigrex, and then a Nargacuga, and then Lagiacrus, all within this particular time limit. Those weren't as you didn't have as big a variety of them as you do now.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm getting it now. So that's a little background on, because he brings those quests up a couple times in the vid too.
Yeah, and they're certainly very difficult, and it's certainly impressive to be able to clear them solo. Which is why you press them up multiple times. But anyway, we can continue.
Gotcha. Because the reason why they'd be difficult, even though they weren't like a super powered state, was because the base monsters were already rather difficult and in a group, right? Or like hard to deal with.
Yeah. I mean, you didn't really have pre Gen 4, Frenzied really was the first alternate state we got in the series. Monsters their difficulty would be dictated primarily by the quest. You'd have some variance. It's actually technically a level. So monsters are assigned a level by the quest. And there's some variance on that level where their HP modifier would go up usually alongside their attack and defense. Their attack and defense didn't necessarily have to correlate directly to the HP, like 1-to-1. Like if you fought a monster with like 1,000 HP and 1,250 HP, like that monster might not have more attack, but like on the very high end, you could encounter a monster that would have more attack and defense. It's actually what makes Monster Hunter 2 really interesting, is because that game had a bunch of systems that tacked on with the seasons and time of day. Very similar to how Wilds has stars for their monsters. The seasons and time of day could influence how likely it was for the monster to basically be an entirely different star tier than it normally is.
That's interesting. Okay, so there is like when there's a lot of DNA from Wilds, or in Wilds that came from Dose, and a lot of inspiration. I was not aware of that actually.
Yeah, there's a bunch of parallels between Dose and Wilds. Jokingly, with Adam and Chaos, we refer to it as Dose, and as for you as Dose, because it's 4. It definitely, you can see the influence, but mechanically, the way seasons and the time of day functions, it is still very different, but it definitely does draw. There are parallels you can find for sure.
Yeah, and you know what? That's funny that the Dose and Dose. There are some parallels I've seen from Wilds to 4U. For example, like the Palico not being able to choose its gadget, but it gets like every type of gadget. I was not aware of that until I was playing 4U.
Yeah.
So that I find that very interesting as well. Okay. Thanks for elaborating on those quests. We'll keep going.
Anything that lessens or detracts from either point will also therefore diminish the crux of the game. So accepting that most other modern games that will do everything in their power to get you to win. So accepting that as the premise, anything that lessens or detracts from either point will also therefore diminish the crux of the game. The amount that it lessens or detracts will affect the amount the core of the game is diluted.
Now, we've been talking for a bit, but the points that he made that he's discussing is the notion that Monster Hunter is not a game that you can over-level or you can outstat things, that the game is actively going to challenge you where you're at and you have to either overcome it or quit. I guess he's basically
there's
saying
some small modifiers you can have over it, but for the most part, it's not like Dragon's Dogma where you can just reach a level and all of a sudden be substantially stronger than what content you're facing.
Yeah, exactly. Like classic RPG farming and grinding to outpace something.
The personal development thing is largely untouched. It's not like they've added NPC summons a la Dark Souls or leveling, although they are coming dangerously close by featuring NPC companions that will buff and heal you at no cost. You could make...
Now that's specifically referring to Cha-Cha and Kayamba, right? And that's the first time they had Palicos?
No. Yes, with regards to 3U, it is talking about Cha-Cha and Kayamba. Freedom Unite was the first game to introduce AI companions.
Oh.
The effectiveness of the Palico, though, in Freedom Unite is varied. There are times where it can be, sometimes the Palico can be more of a hindrance than a help, which is kind of funny. When I talk to my friends about, like, the differences between solo and multiplayer and why I don't always do things in multiplayer, when you have an AI companion, the monster is going to target it. It can be difficult to figure out whether or not it's going to be targeting you or it. And that's one of the things that any AI companion can kind of contribute towards. The other thing that Palicos were modeled after felines in, they're felines and Malinks in Monster Hunter 1. They can throw bombs at you and displace you with the bombs. Now, granted, those give you iframes, and they can sometimes accidentally save you. Other times, you might be out of stamina, get hit by a bomb, are rolling on the floor, and when you're out of stamina, you don't recover it on the floor in second gen. So you don't have, like, you'd think, oh, I can get out of the way of anything. Well, if the monster's lining up to hit you and you don't have the ability to dodge, yeah. It happens. It's not to say that those things come up all that often, but what he's describing is Cha-Cha and Kayamba are certainly more beneficial to the player in terms of providing a consistent benefit towards the player. They're also able to provide. In Monster Hunter Tri, there wasn't a hunting horn. They used to be able to provide songs that would give you buffs that are unique to them. And Monster World Portable Third being a successor to Freedom Unite. Now, Western players didn't, like, when I was... It took me a really long time to start playing Portable Third. It was probably after 3U that I started playing P Third alongside Dose. It was around the same time. So most Western players wouldn't have had experience with them, but there were two Palicos. It was the first game to have two companions. It was P3rd. And overall, their AI is more helpful. But yeah, you didn't really have those support tools playing by yourself. So and Frontier's its own mess, and I'm not really going to touch on that too much. But for the most part, when this was pretty novel, which is why he's bringing it up, to all of a sudden have this AI companion that can deal damage to a monster, heal you, give you buffs, draw its attention in most of the time in more negative circumstances. All of those are things he's bringing up as like, hey, this game is helping you beat it without you needing to do much input, like, to get those bonuses. You know?
Just more general effectiveness from the AI companions. I know I called them Palicos earlier. They're Shakalakas. At least
Yeah, yeah.
Chacha and Kion Bar, but I get what you're saying. Okay. Okay, so it's not necessarily an argument of, hey, these companions are new, it's more so their effectiveness. Okay, that helps clear that up for me.
Make some arguments here, but ultimately the game rewards good players more than good gear, although it's creeping close to missing on this point. It's the second part of that statement that I'm hanging this analysis on. The challenge of the game is definitely diminished, and with diminished challenge comes diluted gameplay. I want to isolate some points here, so I'll start by saying what I'm not talking about. Some factors that make the game difficult, like a time limit or non-regenerating health, haven't changed, but there have been a few huge changes to the challenge. The damage you do is dramatically up. The damage you receive is dramatically down. Your options for safety are greatly increased. Some mechanics that added challenge have been nerfed or entirely removed, and some new mechanics reduce the challenge the game presents. These things together ultimately mean much, much less is required from the player to succeed. Firstly, let's talk about the damage you do. I'm basing this on a comparison between the first portable game with G-Rank, being Monster Hunter Freedom, and the last portable game with G-Rank, being Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate. The method for comparison is the highest raw damage hammer in both games, factoring in sharpness, affinity, and raw damage. You'll get different results if you compare different classes, but they aren't statistically significantly different. In Monster Hunter Freedom, the highest damage hammer is the War Basher at 240 true attack power and blue sharpness. True attack power is the weapon's raw damage divided by the class modifier. It's what Portable Third used to display damage, which is why that game's weapons initially looked much weaker. Obviously the first generation of games didn't have affinity, so just based on that raw and sharpness matrix, you're hitting 1560 damage, being true attack power times hammer class mod.
Now I know he gets into like the damage formulas and stuff, as far as like player damage, but one thing that before you go into it, because I'll probably skip over a lot of this part since it's just talking about how one game has a higher accessible, like, effective raw or effective damage capability than another game's. Wouldn't you also have to take into account health, hit zone values, all these other things? Indeed. I don't believe he ever actually gets into that with this comparison.
I mean, he so yeah, it's always it's a pitfall that you'll find a lot of players get themselves into when comparing across games, whether it even be games within the same generation. Yeah, it's difficult to quantify. Yeah, number is bigger. How does that actually impact the player experience? Because so 3U is a weird game. It's a really weird game relative to its time. So to understand, all the games that came before this were pretty evenly, you could pretty easily divide them into mainline, like console games and portable games. And 3U is the first successor to a console game while being technically on a portable title. Now, Ludi and I have a discussion on like what even is a portable game and a console game. He defines it, I believe, by the director, whereas I consider it based on whether or not it was on a handheld title. Like whether or not it was on a handheld system. So you have Monster Hunter 1, Monster Hunter G, Monster Hunter 2, Monster Hunter 3 as console games, and the thing that those console games share is that they all connected to an online server. And it's very clear that the online experience was at the forefront of where they put most of the focus in on that game. They were expecting you to play with other players. Monsters have like really large health pools because of it. More so than the portable games. Typically you'll encounter more small monsters because more small monsters with a group of people are going to target more people. So the amount of small monsters that you'll have to deal with individually within a group is not as high. You won't usually have like this individualized farm. The farm was something that was introduced in Monster Hunter Freedom alongside the feline kitchen. And the portable games tend to put more of an emphasis on like smaller health pools, a smaller number of small monsters, more of these tools that you can use when you're alone in transit and you don't really have as consistent access to friends, because these portable titles before, I guess, Monster Hunter 4 in Japan, but for you in the West, you weren't able to connect, like there wasn't connecting to an online server and connecting with players. You'd have to be near the player to connect with them and play with them. So 3U's in a weird spot because all of a sudden you're following up Monster Hunter Try, one of those big console games, with a handheld device. And so, yeah, its HP values are kind of a little bit of an in-between. They're not quite as low as, like, say, P3rd, but they're also not as high as stat-wise as Try was, at least as far as I'm aware. So yeah, when you're trying to draw comparisons between 3U, which does have some elements of both a console game and a portable game, and the first portable game, it's not going to evenly... It's hard to draw conclusions just based on those the raw comparisons alone. He does bring up some interesting points though, with regards to just the, not necessarily just the base stats, but like there are more ways to increase your damage in general as time has gone on, outside of builds and within builds, than you did originally. Like originally you really only had the Might Seed, the food buff and demon drug occupied the same slot, and like one attack skill, being usually either attack or sharpness in Gen 1.
Yeah, and now I know he brings up charms and things like that playing a part. I know we'll get to that, but he also chastises the RNG element to it, which I find funny. But the thing you brought up about maybe different design choices were meant to help alleviate some of the pain points of having to play online and stuff like that. I do find that interesting in where a lot of, especially like GU will get this rhetoric a lot, where the hub elements, like sure it's scaled towards 4 people, and GU's health scaling actually like is pretty much, it matches nearly the 4-player health scaling for how like New Gen does it. Like World, Rise, Wilds is like 2.4 times. And GU's like matches that. But GU was also in that same vein of it's 4-player, you don't have the option to have like 2-player health scaling, 3-player health scaling. And so I find it interesting that, you know, while in GU with like a really good team and everything, and even just by yourself with 4-player health scaling, it's much easier to get like lower times still, just because the health pools aren't as large as in New Gen as they are in New Gen, unless we're talking about like hyper monsters and stuff like that. But I find that like element of they're having to hone, because Monster Hunter at its core, especially at around this time period, like literally every single interview I've ever seen in about any of the games, Ryozo's always bringing up multiplayer as one of the most important aspects of Monster Hunter. Just he's always, every single interview I see, whether it's 3U, 4U, he's always harping on multiplayer being a not just a core aspect of the game, but one of the most important aspects alongside the actual action combat against the monsters. And the idea that they're honing that experience for like solo and multiplayer at the same time, because there is a weird push and pull, you know, like you have your village and your hub, sure, but a lot of the like highlight content and like hardest content is going to be in the hub for all the games that I've seen, at least. And so the way that they're having to balance things in real time, like the idea of there being a lot of small monsters, in different spots because it was made in mind of having more than one person there. When it's not necessarily realistic that there'll always be someone to play with.
Yeah, I mean, in the original Monster Hunter, at least as far as I'm aware, the village was sort of an afterthought, which is really interesting because if you watch a lot of newer players, and by newer players I mean people who weren't originally experiencing the original console titles, go back and play the console titles. Most people will say they have beaten like Monster Hunter 1 after they clear the village. And technically, sure, they have. But that was, again, that wasn't necessarily where they were putting most of their time and where they thought the focus of the game would be. Yeah, it's really hard to start in Gen 1 and Gen 2. In general, it just is. It's difficult to pick up one of those games and to play it solo. But I think they were operating under the assumption that, hey, there are going to be other people online who are either also having difficulty and you'll work things out together, or there will be somebody who can mentor you, or a group of people that will, in a very similar way to something like Minecraft mentors players without necessarily giving you a full-on guidebook, or a full-on tutorial.
Yeah. Which there's a For You interview that I've used in previous videos where Ryozo explicitly states that you can utilize any tool by any means to overcome the challenges, and one of those tools is including multiplayer, which I find to be, an interesting thought process. Similar to how, like, if you were playing Dark Souls or something and they're like, well, if you're stuck on a boss, you do have summons. you can summon people if you want. Of course, there is, like, depending on what game you're playing, there's like a finite, like, you have to be in a specific state. Like, for example, in Dark Souls 3, you have to be embered, and you can only have a finite amount of those materials to get you embered. So if you just waste them all, you're done, unless someone can give you one in some way. Whereas, like, in Monster Hunter, it's just ideally always accessible, but realistically not always. So that is definitely interesting. And there's this feeling that a lot of the Monster Hunter community is getting right now, and that a feeling that I've had for a long time, is that Capcom is constantly trying to figure things out. And I know it's a funny thought process. We're 20 years into the series at this point. They're still trying to figure things out. There's a point where Maze brings up how the dev team for the Monster Hunter team isn't the best with balancing armor skills and stuff. And to this day, they're still not great with balancing armor skills and such. Like, there's...
Yeah, and across weapon lines. Like, I don't know that I've seen... There's some Monster Hunter games that do it worse than others, but, like, I don't think I've seen a game where the weakest weapon and the strongest weapon don't have a massive, like, variance in their most optimally played times for different matchups. Yeah, they're still ironing out things. They're still trying to figure out what to do with the hammer and wilds right now.
True. They're remixing on the fly.
Yeah, and I'm sure even if they arrived at a conclusion that was good for one weapon, they're gonna want to shake things up for the next game anyway and see what works and what doesn't work.
Definitely. It's not like... I know in the previous video, I had a funny comparison with Ludi. It was like, Monster Hunter is kind of like Japan's Call of Duty. And, like, there's this, like, formulaic thing with slight changes that are happening, but there was a clear divide at one specific point where they changed the games, and people have just liked them less and less since then. And But there's a funny aspect. Call of Duty gets criticized for being too samey every single iteration in a way. And like, while they have like changed some stuff, sometimes they'll change something like the advanced movement and advanced warfare and such, and that will make people just dislike the game series as a whole because it's not the same thing. And then they go back to the regular formula, and then people complain that it's more or less a lot of the same. In Monster Hunter, we have this funny divide where there are people that want the same, and they probably wouldn't there's literally people begging for things like World 2. Like, they wouldn't complain if they just had the more or less the same, or even like, there's people that have called for DLCs for World, like, to be added on to this day. But they keep on like changing the series over and over again. I mean, even like the games that I've been playing are whiplash inducing. I'm playing through 4U, but from 4U to Gen-U to World to Rise to Wilds, there have been so much absolute nutty change for everything, and nothing stayed the same. We have Prowler that no longer exists, but it does exist for that one game in the middle of all the ones that I've played. The Palicos work differently in every single one of them. They get specced out with different skills, or maybe you only have one, or maybe you can't even choose their skills and abilities. And like down to the Palico mini games, they're all so different from each other. The Monster Hunters in 4U versus the ones in GU, they're like a completely different mini game. It's so funny how nothing is the same ever, except
even mechanics aside, just like what I know people will talk about, okay, like I got walled by Anjanath, or I got walled by Magnamalo, or something along those lines. Like, what people don't understand when they're looking at like a Wikipedia about the games, they can be like, okay, these two games share the same monsters, the same map. What could possibly be different about them? Sometimes it's a massive world of difference. I know you talked to, or you were messaging back and forth with Adam on 4 versus 4U. There were delaying your getup was introduced in 4 Ultimate, and what that changes in fights is like almost everything.
Night and day. It's literally night and day.
No,
I can't imagine fighting Yangaruga without it.
And you look at, like, again, you could look at those games on paper and you're like, wow, yeah, they're very similar. But playing them and getting stuck on different things, when you can craft certain armor pieces, what skills you have access to early on, all of those lead to the game feeling incredibly different. Like, mechanically, sure, a lot of the weapons between GU guild style with no arts and 4U aren't that different, but like how you jump off of ledges, how many ledges there are, the early monsters that you encounter in 4U, all of those things are going to contribute to like the game's feeling dramatically different. And it's just something that I think a lot of people, again, when they're making suggestions like, okay, well, you can just play G, or you can just play Freedom Unite, aren't accounting for are those sorts of changes between the games.
Yeah, Gravios and low rank 4U was like the only monster that I was like, okay, I need to mount spam. That was like the only time I like really felt like I should mount spam. You know, like I actually felt funneled towards it.
Yeah, his fight is very different. Well, just in 4U in general, not having access to 4th generation put a lot of emphasis on vertical combat, so not having access to aerial style just incentivizes the use of either ledges or the glaive.
Yeah.
In a way that you don't really like. I don't know that I look at a ledge in Monster Hunter World and I go, yeah, I can use that to mount and make this fight so much easier. There aren't very many fights in the world that granted, I play Gunlance, and aerial Gunlance is absolutely cracked in World. But
Yeah, when people see the
Yeah.
ledges in the world, they see ooh DPS. They don't see ooh mounting.
Yeah, ooh, this opens up a bunch of spots that are inaccessible. Or this changes up with Gravios, it changes like his belly breaks and his back break, and whereas gas comes out and whatnot.
Because when you get to him, you're rocking green sharpness at that point, and you're just bouncing on everything. And I'm like, okay, I'm trying to get in his belly, but he keeps doing the get off me, so I'm gonna just mount spam him.
Yeah, and you don't bounce or bounce with aerial attacks too, which also helps.
Exactly. I had to farm Nursilla claws, and the high ranking Nursilla, the low rank Nursilla, I was just like, fuck it, I'm just gonna pull out Charge Blade and have Birdie teach me real quick, and then I'm just gonna AED the claws until I get the claws. But in high rank, I was like, I don't want to play Charge Blade ever again, because I hate Charge Blade. It doesn't matter what game, and so I just would spam the pole vault attack into Tornado Slash over and over again because neither of them bounce. And I was just I broke Nursilla's claws like that. I would just spam the pole vault and then Tornado Slash the claws, especially on down. It felt so wasteful using downs for that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting what sorts of things you have to do to overcome certain challenges and where those challenges arise, because it's going to be different for every game. Anyway, yeah, no, we can definitely skip over some of that more granular detail in the video for sure.
Yeah. All right, we'll do a little bit of
multiple sharpness and attack basis. Remember you hammers and armor skills.
Oh.
But then you need to factor in the other. In terms of power creep over 9 years, it's acceptable. But then you need to factor in the other facet of where your damage comes from, armor skills. In Monster Hunter Freedom, the most extra damage you could add to Warbasher from any set was attack up large. It cost 25 skill points instead of 20 in later games, and it only added 10 times the class modifier, so 52 damage for hammers, instead of the 20 times offered in later games. That brings our Warbasher to 1,625 damage, which is a tidy 4%.
Now, just like for jargon standpoint, from my understanding, the class, what he's talking about with the class weapon, he's talking about the bloated values overall, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
So there's different, you'll encounter different terminology in this video. So class modifiers are the amount that you multiply to get the bloated value over the true value.
Okay.
Of, the true raw of a weapon. And then for those of you who've only played World, skill points, in order to activate a skill, you need a certain number of points in that skill. You weren't just given, like when he's saying, oh, you need 25 points to activate attack up large. Each armor piece gave you a certain number of points. You were trying to hit certain break points, usually multiples of 10 or 5. They usually started at 10. And that would activate the skill. So you wouldn't have anything till you activated the skill. Like you could have 7 points in attack, but until you reach that 10 mark, then it wouldn't activate and it wasn't active. Unlike most fifth gen games where like you could have 1 point in a skill and that's the lowest level of that skill. So what he's talking about here is it took less points to get attack up large, and attack up large also gave you double the raw that it did in Freedom. That was actually a change that was introduced in Freedom Unite, the reduction of or the doubling of the raw. But again, a lot of those details in terms of like number go up. Yeah, it's gone up. It's hard to draw a complete stance on like, okay, well, number go up, but did the HP modifiers go up? Did the defense modifiers go up? What does that actually look like? And they're comparing endgame builds too. Like, I don't think you would encounter attack up large on any set really in either 3U or early freedom, like within the first half of low rank. I don't think there's an attackable large set. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty certain there isn't.
That makes a lot of sense. And to kind of expand on the concept of like overall balance, like more number, do bigger damage doesn't equal like faster kills and everything. Think about it like this, like the power that you can have in Sunbreak versus the power that you can have in Iceborne. You can do so much damage with the end game stuff that it's ridiculous. However, the actual stuff you're fighting in game, anomaly monsters and stuff, the health values are so large. You'll be fighting Great Azuchis that have double the health of Fatalis from Iceborne. Like there's just so much to take into account when it comes to that. Just to kind of put it into a new gen perspective. But let's continue.
Increase. By comparison, sharpness +1 from blue to white added just under 4%. You couldn't stack armor skills in this game because there was no gemming or charms, and the developers were pretty sparing when doling.
Wait, so there was no gems in Freedom Unite either?
Decorations in Freedom. He's talking about Monster Freedom 1.
Okay.
Decorations were introduced in Monster Hunter 2. They functioned a little bit differently in Monster Hunter 2, but they'd slowly get tweaked in the next couple of games after that. So when you were building a set, also skill points, I believe, they just got tweaked over Monster Hunter's history. And there's no talismans. Or charms were introduced in Monster Hunter Tri. So in terms of like what you can do to manipulate a build, you have pretty limited options. You can change pieces or remove pieces. That's about it. The amount of like creative building that you can do in first generation was, not to say non-existent, but it was pretty limited. You were just mostly restricted by whatever the set natively had.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's definitely like a kind of culture shocky thing. Like we're so used to gems and decos and talismans and everything at this point.
It's
like
what the entire end game build, or the entire end game is centered around for Monster Hunter. And that end game just really didn't exist till Tri. I would argue that RNG cycle, because charms were RNG predetermined. Yes, you had the crafting end game, right? So like if we talk about different end game systems, you usually have like speedrunning times you could consider as like an end game system. Like however fast you went on the quest. Set building, crafting different pieces of gear beyond what you need to do the base progression, you could consider an endgame system. Crown farming, guild card creation, your hunters' pigments was an endgame system in Monster Hunter 2 because those were achievement based. Titles that you can display to other players. The first time that we get one that's like mostly random, like drops are somewhat random, but you can manipulate drops where you're really at the mercy of whatever the random table is. That's that'd be charms in Monster Hunter Tri.
Gotcha. Okay.
Out skills. Now let's talk 3U. There's a plethora of obscene damage skills to pick from, and that's before we talk about the insane damage multiplier Purple Sharpness offers when we only hit white in Monster Hunter Freedom. Not only are these skills individual,
and at this point, if I recall, Purple Sharpness wasn't like 1.39 times, it was 1.5, wasn't it?
Yeah, there's a few. So Freedom Unite also had Purple Sharpness being 1.5. There's a few games where Purple Sharpness is 1.5. Interestingly, Monster Hunter Freedom is actually the outlier. I believe Monster Hunter G and Monster Hunter DOS have white sharpness being 1.5. Freedom and Freedom 2 don't. so those games, both Freedom 2 and Freedom 1, there's less of an emphasis on getting your sharpness up, but it's pretty popular in Monster Hunter G and Monster Hunter 2 to try to get to that white sharpness value. Granted, you should take my account of Monster Hunter G with a grain of salt. It's one of the 3 games I haven't beaten. That being Monster Hunter 1, I'm probably like less than halfway through high rank. Monster Hunter G, and I'm planning on importing Monster Hunter 1. I did some brief character creation stuff in G, and I've speak with people about G, but I'm not an expert on it. And Monster Hunter 4, Base 4. I know a lot about Monster Hunter Base 4. I'm also probably halfway through high rank on Monster Hunter Base 4. But I haven't beaten them. So in terms of like knowing exactly what people are doing in the end game and what exactly the numbers are, I have things that I've heard, but you should take it with a grain of salt. Like I haven't personally experienced those. Gotcha.
And just for clarity purposes, when you say base 4, that's not including like 4U or 4G.
No, 4U I've fully cleared.
Okay.
No, that's the Japanese version of Monster Hunter 4 that we never got in the West. There's a pretty large gap for Western players when we were waiting for. We didn't get P3rd, so there's a pretty big gap between Monster Hunter Tri and Monster Hunter 3U, and then another pretty large gap between Monster Hunter 3U and Monster Hunter 4U, which is why Maze brings it up earlier in the video, where he's like, yeah, I've seen some footage of Monster Hunter, the 4th generation of Monster Hunter, but because it hadn't been released, he can't really speak towards it, and he brings up some details of 4th gen, and you'll see in some of the comments, like there are some people, this came out pretty close to when 4th gen had launched. Some people think he's criticizing or critiquing 4th gen when he has absolutely no experience with 4th gen. Like it was made before it came out.
Yeah.
So,
and for the audience as well, an important distinction, and we were kind of touching on it earlier, but just like there were major differences between like Base World and Iceborne, less so between like Rise and Sunbreak. Iceborne really changed up the game in that they made every monster clagger, and you have the access to the clutch claw and everything from like even starting back at low rank. There is a significant difference. We touched on how for you was where they actually added being able to delay getting up, so you could use the laydown iframes for a lot longer. And this is something that you may not think about it, but as we stated earlier, it foundationally would change the way that you not only approach combat, but the way that you would have to approach getting punished. Punishment would be, in a lot of ways unavoidable for certain like attacks and follow-ups. Whereas now you can bide your time on the ground and kind of sit and wait if you know an attack's coming, and then time your get up properly. Like little things like that. I've also seen where the charge blade doesn't even have the ability to charge its shield, and how it's missing attacks.
yeah. So that's also something that's interesting to me, having you go backwards in the series. Because usually my recommendation is for people to start with the oldest game they think they can tolerate, and then move forward in the series. Because when you go backwards, and I could be wrong on this, but you're saying, oh, it's missing these things. Like, things are going to be taken away from you.
That's funny, yeah.
Whereas if you start with, like, let's say you start with Monster Hunter 1, everything moving forward is going to, not to say that everything transfers forward, but you're getting a lot more additions than I guess subtractions. Like you're gaining more than the things that you're losing. Not to say that, again, I adopt the stance of like, hey, each game has its own merits, and depending on how much you value different things within the games, not every game is necessarily an improvement over the game that came before. There will be things that will be added, but depending on your outlook, it can either detract or it can add to it. Most of the time, I think most modern gamers would say, "Hey, that's an addition." But there are some people who I've seen from 5th gen who I know people who like Monster Hunter 1 more than say Monster Hunter G, Monster Hunter 2, Monster Hunter World. And that's fine. They're allowed to like the unique things of Monster Hunter 1. But there is this common narrative that every game has objectively made the games better. Well, for you, sure. For the things that you value in Monster Hunter, sure. But that might not be the case for everyone.
Yeah. That's definitely an interesting outlook as well. Like I never thought of it as the whole distinction of things are being taken away from you as opposed to things being added on.
Yeah.
And
that's not to say that you can't have fun with them. Like it's still going to be a fun experience.
Yeah.
It's just going to be you're going to set that as your standard, and so like every single time you move back, you're going to be drawing it from those standards, and based on those standards, you're like, wait a minute. What do you mean I don't have this? I was so used to this.
See, this is that like a weird reverse engineered mindset I'm getting. Is that it's the experiences that I'm having with the newer that's kind of softened me up to go back to what was not interesting to me to try at all. So like playing GU, I was like, I have adept dodge and valor and like all these different things, and like I'm basically like a Superman in old gen. Like sure, it's concrete shoe simulator still, but I'm still like a Superman. Yep. And that like softened me up, and I was like, maybe one of these days I'll try like an old gen game. And I had before I started For You, I did my training arc stream where I was playing Guild IG with no hunting arts. And I was playing against like G rank monsters, and I fought like G rank Zenogre and Tigrex, even Hyper Mizu and like stuff like that. And G rank Gore and Shaggy, just to kind of train up. And I was like, this isn't so bad actually. I had a lot better of a mindset going into For You. It's kind of like I don't want to hop in anything.
Yeah, you're dipping your toes in the water, I get it. It's the same thing for people who've only played World. Like if you it's very intimidating looking at Monster Hunter games that functionally are different from the Monster Hunter that you're used to. And while I would recommend just diving right into the cold water, there's definitely some I can get the appeal of being like, okay, well, this looks interesting, I'll try this. It's going to be closer, to what I know. I can respect that.
Kind of like training up, because like there's definitely going to be like frustrations if you started off in new gen, like going to old gen. But I feel like for example, a really relevant thing, there's something I really hate about a lot of old monsters. Like it's actually pretty funny. There's a couple of people I know and different circles I run with, and their least favorite fights in like GU are the oldest like fights, like first gen, second gen monsters. Like a lot of the newer monsters, completely cool. You could actually stick them in new gen games and they'd kind of fit in a lot of ways.
Yep.
But old gen monsters with like one frame charges and shit like that, and it's like, man, that's frustrating. Their whole body's a hitbox. They keep spamming like this jump attack, this running attack, like, oh, so interesting. And then I go through like different training montages and play through more Monster Hunter, and I get like a different mindset. My third eye opens and I realize, wait, Rathian's not that bad after all.
Yeah, it's so a part of with the older monsters that they bring forward into the series, they're gonna have some of that older DNA, and it's going to clash with the monsters that are very tailored, like specifically tailored um, for whatever that most recent generation is, and there are some old design decisions that are very intentional for when they were designed. Um, that I can understand why people don't necessarily resonate with them. Like, yeah, instant charges might be like, wow, that's really frustrating to deal with. For me playing Gen 2, you learn to read different parts of a monster's behavior than just the initial tell. Because like for most people, they're like, wow, I couldn't have ever predicted it. They just instantly charged. And I'm like, well, was it turning in a particular way? What moves did it lead with? Um, uh, where was I positioned relative to the head? Like, I know it's an option, and therefore I can prepare for it, for knowing that it is an option that it can throw out. And that's not to say that every weapon's going to have like particularly great answers for every option that a monster throws out. But yeah, it's removed from its context, it's going to be pretty jarring.
Yeah. Well, that was the whole thing, right? Like the GU experience was like this. These fights are bullshit. Like some of these fights are like actually bullshit, or just not very good. And learning how to navigate this different style of design, that's helped me a lot in my 4U experience. And I feel like a lot of that will also translate into whenever I finally move to DOS and have to deal with a lot of similar things. And like had I just dove right in, the friction points that will already be present from things that are different from what I like about Monster Hunter will be softened by the fact that I won't have like the extra things compounded, like learning how to deal with insta charges as opposed to and like thinking it's just bullshit, as opposed to like you said, like knowing some of the like actual science of when it's going to come and knowing that it's an option and kind of planning around it, as opposed to like ramming my head against it and just kind of chancing it. Like little things like that.
I mean, it's the same learning process you have in every game. It's just, you know, with it's one of the things that I'd encourage more hunters to do in general is when you have something that's like annoying the crap out of you, either just take a break from it and take a step back from it, or take a creative approach with it, and challenge the assumptions that you have when you're in that mindset of, oh man, I'm getting dumpstered. This is annoying. I hate this. Because a lot of Monster Hunter, like, again, I had a bad initial impression of Monster Hunter as a series, but you can have a bunch of bad initial impressions of monsters, and if you take the time to mess around with them, they can surprise you, and turn into some of your favorite fights. It's one of the things that gives Monster Hunter a lot of replay value, in my opinion. There's a lot of nuance to be found even in the simplest of monsters. And some people are going to have more patience for that. And I've had a lot of years to learn these fights, whereas most people are, the vast majority of players are kind of just starting on that longer journey if they are bothering to start it at all.
Yeah.
But it's a fun journey if you are willing to commit to it.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting, and it's like one that benefits from multiple different games. Like I didn't like Rathian's fight in World. I didn't like it in Iceborne. I didn't like it in GU on my first outings and like working through Village. I didn't like it in Rise. Now I really like Rathian's fight in every single game. And it's just because I learned how to deal with some of the stuff that I didn't know how to deal with prior, and that translates into every game that I play now.
Yeah, because her fight shares that. What's cool is her fight shares that DNA, and it's the same thing with like what is it called? I'm sure a bunch of Rise players, when they look at Mizu now in Wilds, they're like, oh, I recognize this, and this in this version of Mizu. You're never really, depending on whether or not you're going forward or back, you are never really starting from scratch when you encounter a monster in any game. Like, you're gonna be like, okay, I recognize this attack, that attack, this is how I can deal with these things given my options. And granted, you're gonna have, if you're going back in time, you're gonna have more and more of those options reduced. At the same time, the complexity of the monster in general is going to go down too. So they'll be, I guess, boiled down to their fundamentals if you go all the way back to Monster Hunter 1.
True, yeah. I mean, in some ways, funny enough, though, some monsters are more complex the older you get.
Yeah, like, there's certain interactions that they'll have that they don't have anymore.
Yeah, like Nursilla, for example, in Wilds. Or even Blungonga is slightly watered down in Wilds compared to its initial outings, I think.
Yeah, and there are some pain points on that end. Like, yeah, I wish they would be. I wish more of their original fight had carried over, or like their original design elements had carried over differently. But at the same time, it is cool. It is cool to see how they rework things for a newer audience, even if that doesn't necessarily translate into like all their mechanics being preserved or all of their combos being preserved, you know?
Yeah, because especially something like, I know I just said Blungonga, but thinking on his fight, the way he jumps around like the raptors, like the drones a lot.
Oh yeah,
is like such an annoying, like it would be so out of place in new gen. In second gen, his small monsters are the only small monsters. I think they're the only ones. I'm pretty certain they're the only ones who can get enraged. Oh wow!
And they enrage when he does. And so like those pack dynamics, I mean, I wish Wilds did a little bit more with their pack dynamics, and we'll see what the expansion does. It's totally possible that Master Rank flips the script and brings back a lot of the stuff. I don't know exactly what they'll do. But yeah, and when they're enraged, like when you encounter a Blango, the smaller ones normally, they have like, I think like a charge, a slam similar to the Congas, but they gain the ability to throw little ice chunks at you in a similar way to like his big ice chunk. It's neat, and there's different ways of dealing with them. In Dose, they're pretty brutal, but yeah, no, they do drop. There are some elements that they'll drop in different games, and if you're going backwards, I guess you'll be like, oh, okay, so this is what that was like, you know. You do get the benefit of seeing that.
Okay. The that is cool. I know that we just went on a whole tangent about
tangent.
Working through the
progress
series.
of the video has certainly been slow.
Yeah.
Slow. Yeah.
I mean, the main objective, is just deep diving into old gen and like different changes across the series, and the difficulty argument and how like it parallels today, but also like we've been hitting on a lot of other things like progression of the series, things they may have dropped, things that they've honed over time, things they're still trying to figure out. I think all of that plays into the video as well, and into the subject at hand, because the core identity goes around that why Monster Hunter sucks now, and this is a question and a statement that has been being every single generation, it seems. There's new reasons why it's better than ever. And I guess in a way, talking about all of this is also touching on the aspects that make each generation simultaneously special and better than the previous ones, but also worse than the previous ones and less special. It's such a different franchise where everyone seems to have their favorites, and like you said, there's people that can start in 5th gen and go back to 1st gen, and that could be their favorite, just because of the uniqueness of Monster Hunter as a whole. And
yeah, it attracts a lot of subcultures, and playing through, it's not to say that I want everyone to play through the series. I would encourage you to try it, whoever is listening, to give it a shot. And there are going to be things that there might end up being things that you hate, and you might end up not wanting to play the games, and that's fair enough. But the goal, one of the goals, again, for my channel, is to showcase the cool parts of each individual game, to encourage people who wouldn't otherwise try it to actually give it a shot, because it might not be, you might not be the one, but there might be another person in the audience who might actually try some random game and end up falling in love with it. At the very least, it is a different twist on the same series you already enjoy. It's going to have that fundamental Monster Hunter 1, and every other Monster Hunter game in the mainline series is going to have that fundamental gameplay loop of signing up for quests, going out, and I mean, unless the expansion for Wilds mixes this up, but as of recording this, going out and trying to overcome a challenge or grind out some materials, and use that to take on even greater challenges and learn more things and overcome, bigger and badder threats. It's a good time.
And to be part of an in-world hunting guild, and an out-of-world hunting guild with your buddies, or just any randoms.
Yeah, I was just
online.
about to say there's also ways you can shake up your experience, because playing and socializing with other people can make a game that you might consider a 0 out of 10 a 10 out of 10, and vice versa. Like if you're like, wow, this game is way too easy for me, okay, well then throw in some challenges, mix it up for yourself. Try hunting alone,
that, or go SOS, the hardest challenges. go hop in SOS hunts.
Yeah, try mixing things up.
All right, let's get back into this video.
Individually far more powerful, you can slap a bunch of them together. Even without a god tier charm, and we'll talk about those later, you can get adrenaline +2, attack up large, and critical draw pretty easily. Taking out a Ruger hammer for an unsheathed hit, and we get 3,163 damage. That's 64% more than the basic unboosted hit, on top of already doing about 20% more than Warbasher. This massive damage boost is offset by a couple of things. Firstly, 3rd generation creatures often have higher hit points and much higher stagger limits, so it's very hard to soft lock something, and of course headlocking was removed long ago. But you are still pumping.
Is that true? It's harder to soft lock things, and you said headlocking was removed long ago. I know that it was a first gen thing.
I had a long conversation with somebody from the old school Discord. They go by Sammy, and I had actually brought up this video to them because I'm like, right now, currently, I'm partway through high rank in Monster Hunter 1. And I wanted to make sure that I wasn't losing my mind that the way that the game calculates staggers is the same in Gen 1 as it is in Gen 2, as it is in Gen 3. So let's say, and this is easier with damage numbers on, like in, obviously, games before World, you didn't have damage numbers, so like testing this sort of stuff could get a little tricky. But let's say Rathalos, we're going to use it as an example, had a pretend it has a stagger limit of 100 on the head. That means you have to do 100 damage, and it'll go into a stagger animation. Now, let's say while its head is being staggered, you exceed the stagger limit for the wings, which could be like 50 or whatever number you want to assign it. That stagger that would have occurred on the wings gets eaten. So the part of the reason I assume that Maze has a misconception of headlocking being removed. It's more that the stagger limits got tweaked between games, and I shouldn't say the stagger limits. The amount of damage that and the hit zones of the monster that you used to be able to output on certain creatures got tweaked, along with some of the weapons got changed around. Like obviously you have G rank, and they're gonna have different stats on that end. But if you're watching somebody do a headlock in, say, Monster Hunter 1, because I don't know if Maze played Monster Hunter 1 online, or if he's watching footage of this. I don't know where he's drawing this information from. But let's say you're watching somebody headlock Rathalos, and they're doing it very quickly. It's going to look like you are staggering the monster while it is already staggered. And the reason it's going to look that way is because the way the networking used to work on the PS2 games versus the PSP games, which Maze is more familiar with, the PSP games communicate directly to each other. They actually have, in a quest, they have better networking and more accurate networking than the PS2 games do. Because what the PS2 games do is they could communicate peer-to-peer if they were coded a little bit better, but they communicate through the server. Like they'll send data to the server, and there's a difference in ping when you're standing right next to somebody with a PSP. Whereas if you're like, let's say even a city over, or state over, that's a lot of room for the game to make assumptions and then get corrected. So if you go back, or if you currently log into the PS2 servers now and you're playing with a friend who's not particularly close to you geographically, what can happen is, let's say somebody flinches the monster can take a minute to receive the flinch. So like, let's say on their screen, they flinched it just before you got hit. Well, on your screen, you're still going to get hit because it's going to take a minute for them to interrupt it. And both of your games will do this really funky thing where it'll look like whoever's hosting the area is gonna see you get hit by nothing and the monster being staggered. And the player who isn't hosting the area is going to see the monster snap back to a previous position and get staggered. It's just the nature of how area hosting works. It's just a little bit of an area hosting 101. It's the same thing for like, because I had a conversation with Incognito Man, who made Freedom Unite Complete, which is a mod for Freedom Unite. And one of the questions I had asked them was like, hey, let's say two players attack a monster, how does the damage get calculated? Well, it prefers the area hosts. Like the area host is the one who's going to be doing all the damage calculations. There isn't ever going to be an instance where you will do double damage, but let's say you're not the area host and you miss. You charge up a greatsword, right? You miss the head, but on the host screen you hit the head, then you've dealt the damage. And effectively you've gotten a free hit without losing sharpness.
Oh, wow.
And this happens, area hosting actually still happens in modern titles. It's just the networking is much better on modern titles, so you don't notice it as much. But when you start lagging, if you're ever wondering why monsters are behaving the way they are, it's your game trying to, like, receiving data and correcting itself after it's made a bad prediction on what's going on the host's end. which is why one of your friends, like let's say you have like 2 friends, whoever happens to be hosting will see no lag for the most part. But you and the other friend could be lagging like no tomorrow and having issues. It just happens. So yeah, long story short, they didn't remove headlocking. It's just, I think he misunderstood it because of the nature of, likely due to the nature of how networking worked on the PS2. But yeah, they would tweak a lot of the hit zone values for monsters, in between a number of games, like within the same generation, including Gen 1 and Gen 2. So it's a lot harder to lock down creatures. That's true. That's not, there's nothing really unique there outside of, obviously the weapon balance and the armor skill balance, but also the stagger limits, the defense values of the monsters. All those things are just exactly the same as they are in locking down a monster in, say, Iceborne, like Nergigante, right? To get him to fall over, you just have to do enough damage to the parts that are regenerating. It's like getting a stagger on one of his on his regrowing thorns, you know. It just so happens that the because of the bloated HP values, I shouldn't say bloated, because of the larger HP values in 3U and the larger stagger limits, it just is harder to lock down monsters by comparison to like the portable second gen titles. It's not to say that you're doing less damage to them. It's more that like the intervals at which you would see a stagger are different.
Gotcha. And how much, if at all, would the network stuff apply to solo play? It wouldn't probably affect it at all.
No, not at all.
Okay.
And the way that an area host is dictated in most of the Monster Hunter games is the first person who happens to enter the zone. And now, I don't know how that works with 5th gen, where the maps are open. I mean, they're segmented into zones, and maybe that's somewhat what dictates it. But it's usually not the quest host. Like, a lot of people have this misconception that whoever posts the quests, whoever posts the quests, there's a weird priority to area hosting, and there's a write-up actually on the old school forums that you can follow. I'm pretty certain it's on the forums, either that or it's pinned in the old school Discord, of how area host logic works. And I'm sure I'm misremembering some of the details, but no, when you're playing solo play, you're not networking. So, for the most part, if you see something funky happening in solo play, that's usually just the game.
Okay. Would you still say solo, like some second gen titles, like specifically, he talks a lot about Freedom 2 and Freedom Unite. Would you say it's easier to stagger lock even in those games compared to third gen?
I mean, no. How would I describe this? There are certain locks that you can perform on monsters, or like not entire locks, but yeah. So let's say you're stacking adrenaline and heroics, which you can do in Freedom 2. For the record, adrenaline and heroics are the food skill that gives you a damage bonus when you're at really low health, and the armor skill that gives you a damage bonus when you're at really low health. Those used to multiply in Freedom 2. After Freedom 2, I'm pretty certain there's never been a game where both of those have stacked. But what you can do is on a monster like Kashala, whose head stagger results in a topple, like where it falls over. If you know the number of hits that you need to perform in order to make Kashala fall over, yeah, you can hit it a certain number of times, let it stand up, and then topple it again. Now, if you hit it before its topple is completed, then you have to restart the number of hits. and build it all back up again. And when you're playing with Adrenaline Heroics, that usually results in you getting one shot, even by like it moving slightly, because there's he'll bring it up later. There's chip damage from the small movements of monsters, which isn't as prevalent in games after the second generation. But yeah, no, you can certainly lock down monsters. I know some people will attempt to flash spam and lock down monsters that way with bowguns. The effectiveness of which you can do those sorts of things does vary both by your weapon type and by the monster. So it's not a free win button. And same thing with headlocking. Like headlocking was very consistent in Monster Hunter 1 with the lance, which happens to be the most powerful weapon class in Monster Hunter 1. And G.
The infamous lance headlocking fatalis and literally everything.
Well, I mean, you can't. How would I describe it? You can bait fatalis. I wouldn't describe that necessarily as a headlock. Gravius, for example, is a monster that I'm not sure headlocking is particularly effective on. You would rather like poke at his belly and try to stagger it repeatedly that way. But yeah, stagger locking monsters happens in World 2. Like if you watch any of, I think is it TSC?
TDS?
There's a
Team Darkside?
No, not Team Darkside. Not Team Darkside, but they can stagger lock too. But there was a solo player who used to abuse a bunch of like aerial gun lance, aerial greatsword, aerial hammer.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can stagger lock. You can stagger lock in any game. Usually the setups are just more elaborate, and it is harder to stagger. He is correct. It is harder to stagger lock in the third generation compared to the second generation, but I wouldn't necessarily describe it as particularly easy to do that in all the second generation games. Like Freedom 2 is a very big outlier on that end, but that's again because it's got adrenaline heroic stacking, and if you're doing that, you're pretty proficient at the game anyway, because again, any hit kills you. You're at 10 HP. I should say almost any hit. There's some very minor hits maybe that you'll live. Yeah, speedrunners do some pretty crazy stuff.
Yeah, most definitely. And Maze is a speedrunner, right? Like, isn't he?
Yeah, so Maze was known for, honestly, I don't know how many Western speedrunners there were, like, who got as popular as Maze. I'd probably equate Maze to somebody like Kanta, or I don't know if they'd necessarily be as popular for the Western scene as like Team Darkside is, because they've really taken over things. But Maze was pretty well known, at least among people who both use the internet and and played the older Monster Hunter games, at least from what I saw. So again, they knew for the time, they knew a lot about the games. Obviously, we know more things about the games as time has gone on than Maze knew at the time, and I'll bring up some of the stuff as we go a bit further into that. But I don't know how well Maze was known outside of the international scene, because Japan actually did speedrunning competitions. I'm aware of speedrunning competitions that existed back in 2006. September 2006, we know that there was a speedrunning competition. I was talking to Shepard about this, about a speedrunning competition held for Monster Hunter 2 at the, and the person who was writing, because I was archiving a bunch of blogs, and one of the things that they had mentioned was there was actually a speedrunning competition that had occurred earlier in 2006. But what's interesting about the nature of speedrunning is there's a bunch of different categories and ways to speedrun. So you can speedrun individual hunts, and that's the type of speedrunning Maze did. Then there's speedrunning that adds restrictions. So like there's I actually created a speedrun category for Freedom Unite that's inspired by the TA Wiki rules for speedrunning individual quests without using traps and those sort of additional tools. They also ban heroics and some other things that help you lock down the monster. There's any percent speedruns, which have you do, I should say percent speedruns, where you do a percentage of the game or you get up to a particular point, and the goal is to get to that point in the game as fast as possible. But the speedruns that were held in 2006, they weren't, so modern runs on Wilds use the arena quests, and a lot of official competitions, from what I understand, were done using arena quests. Number one, because arena quests used to track your time and save it on a leaderboard. Speedruns for Monster Hunter 2, number one, were done in person. I'm pretty certain people brought their memory cards, but they were using regular quests, and it wasn't because they weren't arena quests. People could bring whatever gear they had, which is really interesting because it's kind of like the free challenge quests that we have in Wilds, where you're beating up the arch-tempered monsters as fast as possible, and there are no restrictions. It is a shame that Wilds has a huge cheating issue with its speedrunning scene. If it didn't, it'd be really interesting to see. I mean, it still is if you watch YouTube videos, but it would be really interesting to see how people slowly push times and what sort of theory crafting gets done with that. And I'm sure if you looked hard enough, you could find it, but it's not as evident from looking at the leaderboards. But yeah, so again, Maze is just relative to his time is very experienced compared to like just somebody who's casually playing through Monster Hunter 1, Monster Hunter Freedom, Monster Hunter Freedom 2, and Freedom Unite, and then the third gen games. Gotcha.
This is still just earlier in the series, more of a Wild West time when it came to like actually understanding the games completely and like having the data and everything.
We also, so we didn't have damage numbers that showed up on monsters. A lot of so it was a mix for the Western community, it was a mix of some things being translated over from Japan's websites and resources, like the guidebooks, their own wikis that they had. And that, again, Japan didn't fully understand the games either. I've looked at the research that they've done, and I've talked to Incognito about this. Like, their most extensive research, it has a ton of errors too. It's also harder to, like, it's really I shouldn't say it's easy. Modern games get data mined pretty often. We still don't fully understand everything about the Gen 1 and Gen 2 games, because it's old code, but the code isn't necessarily written. It's harder to parse, from what I understand. I'm sure that if you talk to some of the old school developers, they could probably explain that in a lot better, like in much more detail than I could. But yeah, it's impressive how much he does know, given that there was so much speculation and so many rumors floating around. And if you go back far enough on the would be the fandom wiki, people are just kind of spitballing and seeing what stuck, and making up rumors. It's a lot to. It was a lot to figure out at the time. So yeah, again, what he does know is impressive.
Cool. Yeah, definitely hard to understand series. I mean, even to this day, pretty hard to understand. A lot of info that can be rough to sift through, even with all the resources we got now, let alone at this time period. Okay, so that clears up a lot about the like headlocking and stuff. I know that he mentions something similar later on in the video, but we can cross that bridge when we get there naturally.
Out a lot more damage, and with something like 65% of that coming from your gear, you can see the shift in importance from player skill to player gear. I did say before that the game still rewards skill over gear, and that's still true, but when you're putting out that much more damage, you don't need to be as good to kill a creature. It is true that stagger limits could easily be manipulated by expert players in previous games.
So the thesis behind like player skill versus player gear being, one being more important than the other. One thing that I know he's talking about 3U specifically, but even like 4 and 4U, I'm seeing like progression style things where even in high rank, my buddy Birdie, who's also playing 4U right now, he made full Velociprey because it gives him handicraft and attack up.
And it's got solid defense on top of that too, yeah.
Yeah, and solid defense. And like that's like from like thinking about old gen, like that's a really strong like early high rank setup. I know like in new gen
that was the best armor set, one of the best armor sets I should say, in Freedom Unite was just getting sharpness +1 and attack up large.
Yeah, okay, so in Freedom Unite as well. Freedom Unite, it was also prevalent.
That's not to say that that's the definitively the best set. You have things like focus, you have things like adrenaline, you have things like for gunners like auto reload. But yes, there is certainly a pretty big difference in terms of, as you go up the games, what set building you can do and how much it modifies the base stats of the weapons found in low rank or high rank or whatever the point of progression is.
Yeah, because I can't say it's not enticing. Like I am trying to play through the game the way I've played through the others, where I don't make sets. I just kind of build pieces as I go, just to kind of improve my defense as I go. But I can't say it's not enticing to make that full set knowing that I'm going to have blue sharpness when I won't see blue sharpness for a while otherwise. So it's like a little things like that are noticeable. Like when I think of new gen equivalents, like I think about like Great Azuchi gear that had like critical eye and things like that on it. Like nothing so like significant as like as significant as like a sharpness +1 in 4 from what I've seen. And
well, so it's hard to draw that line because how to describe this? Number one, the modifier. So when the modifiers for sharpness have been changed quite a bit over time. I don't know exactly what 4's numbers are off the top of my head, but you're looking at like, let's say even if it was like a attack up medium and blue sharpness, if I had to guess, is probably like somewhere around a 10-20% increase on damage. I don't know exactly how it would break down, but yeah, running whatever you want, provided you have again, your weapon's going to dictate more of that, provided you have a decent weapon to go in. I'm not sure that and again, you'll be able to topple things and keep them down on the ground longer, but I'm not sure that it's going to result in like drastically different kill times.
Yeah.
But the game does certainly incentivize you to, when you see an effective strategy in particular, you're like, okay, yeah, I'd like to be more effective. It does subtly incentivize you to optimize.
Yeah. So is that what like he's kind of leading towards right now? Like I know that I don't have that second gen, first gen perspective. I know you mentioned that in Freedom United.
He's implying that like the amount of, because there's a bigger damage increase that you receive from skills and armor, the amount of work that you would have to do to take down monsters is less because of it. Now, I'm not necessarily gonna like. I don't necessarily think that he's, again, it's part of his longer points. It's hard for me to say that, okay, well, he's definitively right or wrong about that, because like if I take a look at something like purple sharpness modifier getting you up to, in Freedom Unite, it was like 50% extra damage, or adrenaline in Freedom 2 getting you up to 50% extra damage with just for being in range of it. If you compare that to something like, let's say, weakness exploit, critting on a monster does what, 25% extra damage when you hit a crit. If you hit that 50% of the time by only attacking weak points, that's only a 12.5% effective increase in your damage, provided you aren't manipulating the crits or you don't get lucky with the crits and you're just hitting an average crit rate. And you aren't running crit boost. If you compare, like, if you were just to compare that one skill to the one skill of the other game, it's just not as big of an outlier. It's hard to take everything in totality, though. Like, how do I compare the bigger multipliers from previous games for individual skills versus the smaller multipliers, but like more numerous skills that you get in modern titles? If you were to go back to Monster Hunter 1, like, it's definite, like, or Gen 1 in general, it's definitive that there's power creep for the buffs that a player can receive. It just is. You can't decorate, like, you can't use decorations to improve your armor at all. You don't have food skills. The number of items that increase your damage is basically just Might Seed, which is the same as the regular food buff. You know, like, it's not. It's pretty evident that the player's gotten stronger. He does some quick math on like what what he thinks is the most optimal amount of damage that you'd output. But from a non-speedrunning perspective, like, he's coming at this from, like, if you were comparing an endgame player exploiting everything they could in both games, then yes, there's definitely power creep there. I just don't know how well that translates to people playing inefficiently, and most people were playing inefficiently.
Yeah.
Like, I casually played through those games when I was playing through them, so I'm not sure how many people would see the level of power creep he's talking about. With regards to this point, there's some other points he'll bring up where I'm like, yeah, that does impact newer players going through it casually too.
Okay.
But yeah, there's a lot of variables that go into it. I'm not sure that I don't have a spreadsheet in front of me. It would take a spreadsheet in front of me for us to come to like any sort of conclusion. But like, that's the hard part about talking about difficulty. And don't get me wrong, I'm pretty certain he had notes when writing this that he was going over. But that's the hard part of having these difficulty conversations, even with regards to World versus Rise, World versus Wilds. Are we evaluating difficulty, like, at what stage in the game, for what level of play? And as not to say that, like, what's it called? You can always artificially increase your difficulty. I could tie one hand behind my back and try to play through the games that way, like that. You know, there's ways to do that, but a lot of people aren't. When speedrunners like this are having these conversations, they're usually talking about, again, more optimized play, and it's not something that most players are going to have. They're not necessarily going to see in their games, nor they're going to be as familiar with, like, the sort of exploits that speedrunners are pulling off. They're effectively playing not entirely different game, but like, yeah, a substantially different game than the one that a person doing a casual playthrough is playing.
Yeah.
Even a person who's like farming items. Like, yeah, you want to farm items efficiently, but there's very different methods of doing that. That's going to look different than time attack runs.
Yeah. And there's like so many different varying degrees, like not even from a speedrunner perspective, but just from an experienced player's perspective. Like, before I learned what to look for as far as like one frame charges goes, I was at a loss. Like, I had no clue how to deal with it. I had no answer for it. I just thought it was bullshit. But now, like, actually understanding, and I was actually having this discussion with a speedrunner that goes by Monster Hunter.
Okay.
And I was discussing Rathian, like old gen Rathian. Rathian's one of his favorite hunts. And Rathian was, I hated Rathian when I was playing through GU. Absolutely hated it, because she was one of the bigger, like, perpetrators of one frame charge spam. Like that kind of, I'd bang my head into it, and it was so frustrating. And then I was actually, and there had been multiple conversations because I wasn't alone with that. Like multiple people that played through GU thought Rathian was bullshit.
I mean, it's
not the one frame charge.
It's a common grievance even in 5th gen games. Like I've had friends complain about.
True, like New Cuckoo, New Cuckoo has one.
yeah.
But I'd seen conversations where people were like, yeah, I think Rathian's a bad fight. And then there would be people that love like old gen or like had been playing GU for hours upon hours. I'm like, yeah, that's a take I've never heard before. It's like, that's crazy. How could you say that? It's like, and their defense would be like, not necessarily like get good, but it was kind of get good. You know, like
yeah, I mean, it's not really, the hard part is it's not particularly helpful to the player who's learning just to be dismissive and say, hey, figure it out.
Or to just be like, it's easy to deal with it. You can headlock her easy, like all these different things.
Yeah, and people will pick up on different moves and different monsters faster than others. Yeah, it's a common what is it called? It's a common critique, and it's not just older monsters that people will again have gripes, and then their response will just be, yeah, just do it better, you know?
Yeah. Well, like that, it's kind of like that third eye opening moment when you're at a different level. Like it comes naturally, and I kind of touch on that in the difficulty video. Like the whole like you can't go back to how you were before you figured out some of the things that are deeply ingrained in the way you play now. You can never unlearn.
And that's why it's why it's hard for me to. So like I've been working on. I've actually been working on Beginner's Guide for Monster Hunter 2. And that has been delayed. It was supposed to come out like a year ago. It has been delayed multiple times because for me, I operate on a lot of assumptions because I have experience I started in the 2nd generation. There are things that come intuitively to me that people who didn't have, like, they didn't go through the same learning process that I did and didn't experience the same material that I did. They're going to encounter different things, and part of the reason it's taken so long is I have like 2 new players who will hopefully get through Monster Hunter 2 and then give me some feedback on this, who will be helping refine some of the talking points in it. But yeah, no, it's just tricky when you're at a different point in your journey and you're starting with a different game to offer advice as well. Like, what fundamentals people have, it's going to be different. It is a different skill set to learn like the same weapon in different games too, because the movesets change, because the monsters change. There's like an entire different universe even between playing the console titles for Gen 1 and Gen 2 and playing the portable titles in Gen 1 and Gen 2. And those weapons effectively, not to say they have the exact same movesets between Gen 1 and Gen 2, because they did get expansions to them. But they have a lot more of their identity. They share a lot more of their core identity with each other. But yeah, it's tricky even moving between them.
It can be.
I don't know that I could adopt I'm impressed that Maze has adopted a stance. Is confident enough to be like, yeah, I'm taking a stance on this game is easy, this game is more difficult, because I wouldn't really know where to begin on that. It'd take a lot of research, at least for me.
For sure. And it's hard to really put yourself in a place where you can quantify that, because the weapons are all so different from each other. Like, thinking about, I started in World, and I'll tell people that I play Insect Glaive, and Insect Glaive has no bad matchup in the game. Like, whereas like some other weapons might have bad matchups, like Great Sword and Nargacuga maybe, something like that. But Insect Glaive has an answer for any monster in the game. Every single one of them. There's not a single fight that I can think of in World and Iceborne that Insect Glaive doesn't have an answer for and can't respond to appropriately. And even make the fights easier. Like AT Volcana is infinitely easier with Insect Glaive. Because you can dodge the hardest mechanics to deal with just by pole vaulting and then air dashing, and then if you really need to extend that time, advanced round slash in the air after an air dodge.
Yeah, and you could also clutch claw if I'm not mistaken.
And you can clutch claw from the air. So like,
yeah,
there's like so many different elements to, you know, what weapon that you're playing. Even if you play World classically in longsword and you don't bother using EI counter at all, you just use Foresight Slash. I remember most people that played longsword didn't even bother with EI counter because of how punishing it was. Most people that I was aware of that played longsword didn't even bother with EI counter because of how punishing it was, how hard it was to hit, and how even if you hit it, it just didn't deal enough damage to justify using it in the first place, taking that risk. So most people would just use it for style points if they even used it.
Yeah, or on a fight that they're particularly comfortable with.
True. But then you go to base Rise, and the entirety of the playstyle gets localized in the DPS of EI counter into Soaring Kick into Helm Splitter. And it was not only easier to land, but it also rewarded you. It didn't punish you if you missed. And all these other elements to it. But then you see like longsword players go back and play World, and they're trying to EI counter a lot, and they're getting dunked on because there is an easier available playstyle to play, but they're playing a harder one that's more punishing, it's more risky. It's like even like going from game to game in that way is really like weird in a lot of ways. Going from World Greatsword to Wild's Greatsword, it might feel like it's a lot easier to play. But then you go from Wild's Greatsword and you go to like play Valor Greatsword in GU. And that, to me, feels easier to play than even Wild's Greatsword. And so, like, there's all sorts of, like, different things that just change the experience. And part of that, like, I'm playing Insect Glaive through 4U. The funny thing is, the whole, like, Rathian anecdote about, not liking the insta charges, I love Old World Rathian now. I actually like the fight a lot. I have an answer for the insta charges. I have an answer for the way that she moves. I understand it better, and it was through my experience with Generations Ultimate that I came to that realization. And the funny thing about the Rathian thing was before I even played Generations Ultimate, I first tried soloed Alatron with Raw in Iceborne. I didn't play it at Alatron drop, but I first tried it with Raw, with a full Raging Bracky set, Raging Bracky Glaive. Fatalis, I didn't first try him. I don't think anybody did. But I ended up beating him within the 24 hours that he dropped. I beat him solo, same setup, full Raging Bracky gear and a weapon. Sure. AT Volcana, also beat it first try, but I was using Insect Glaive. Insect Glaive trivializes that fight, especially after you fight Fatalis. And so like I wasn't necessarily like riding a high of like, oh, I'm pretty good at these games. But I was like fairly confident that okay, I am at least good enough to be able to handle a more challenging like thing going back to like a previous game or something. Which is how I felt going into Gen Alt. And I didn't really struggle through Generations Ultimate. I played regular. The only sets that I ended up making, just because I felt that like I wanted to, was I made a full high rank Rathalos set, and then I made a full like G2 Siennatar set. And the Siennatar set wasn't even like the actual like Siennatar set. There was like 2 different sets, and one of them you can make earlier. I made the one you can make earlier, and I ran through the rest of G rank with that. But there was these little things like Rathian. Like I felt like such a chump getting bullied by Rathian over and over again, despite fighting monsters that to me were not only like harder in terms of mechanics and lore and complexity, but also things that like were legitimately locking people up. Like people were leaving bad reviews on the game. People were quitting and not even bothering to try to solo it. But here's this Rathian just dunking on me with these same moves over and over again. And it's like, that's why I felt like it was bullshit. I was like, I don't have an answer for this because it's literally, there's no answer for it. But let alone, there is an answer for it. And now that I know the answer, I can't go back to how I was before when I didn't have the answer. I now have an understanding and appreciation for the fight that I didn't have before. And it bleeds into a lot of the fights. Like, there's so many fights with charges, like from Yangaruga to Gypceros. All these fights that would probably be like stomping my balls on my first 4U playthrough, they're not bothering me because I have an answer for it now. And so like difficulty is so weird because the whole like, there's a whole debate on, oh, your first Monster Hunter's the hardest and transferable knowledge and everything. I always used to say that it was mostly like an old gen versus new gen thing. Like your first new gen game would be like the hardest feeling when you start and you're learning. And then if you went back to old gen, it would be a different learning experience. So you could re-experience that in a lot of ways. And even in like moving from old gen to new gen, a lot of old gen vets, they didn't play like Monster Hunter for years. And then when World dropped, they kind of had to relearn everything. And certain things were missing, like the pivot turns and all that. And even like weapons were changed up, like Greatsword, for example, or even like Longsword had the foresight slash. I know in the difficulty video, one of the funny like data points was Uno Hunter's Hunt. And he literally like played Longsword as if it was 4th gen Longsword. Like he barely threw out a foresight slash. He only like threw out one Helmbreaker or two. Like he was playing it like it was old gen Longsword. And so it was just, it was definitely like an interesting experience, like seeing old gen vets playing that. It's just,
yeah, and it's not to say that they're playing badly when they're doing that. It's just the play style itself is just not the one that's coded to do more damage.
Yeah, they're working with obsolete like data now.
Yeah, I mean, and it's the same thing with it'll be the same thing when you go back to like things that you've gotten used to using more regularly are just not going to fill the same use cases between games for each weapons kit. And that's what's really cool. Like, I think that's what's really cool about Monster Hunter is, and the reason it has, again, so many different subcultures and different smaller fan bases is the games, despite sharing, again, most of the same DNA, really are quite different in the way that you actually mess around with things and experience things, even if the games don't have like a defining gimmick between them, like water or underwater combat versus like aerial movement in 4th gen. Like there's some smaller things that will make a world of difference, and I don't think people give that enough credit. It's the same reason that I get bugged by people describing changes in the series as being quality of life, because you might like, don't get me wrong, you might like a change, like for example, not running on pickaxes. That might be a healthy change overall, but it's a mechanical change. And the way I would describe quality of life changes would be like the number of equipment sets you can hold in your chest. I would describe as a quality of life change, because that doesn't have any major like gameplay ramifications, whereas like having a finite number of pickaxes, there's a big difference between being able to mine and not being able to.
Yeah,
there's not a big difference between selecting your head, chest, and waist because you ran out of equipment slots in your equipment box. Yeah, there's just a lot of small contributing factors that make the games feel really, really different. And again, we talked about Monster Hunter 4 versus 4G or 4U. Those games, if you do end up, I know you're going through the Western releases, or at least you were going through the Western releases. If you do end up getting to the point where you start playing the games that came before their expansions, they are going to, I think you'll be surprised just what's similar and what's different, and they are going to feel different to play through, despite most people claiming that they're just another game but less.
Yeah, I mean, just even the small like bringing it back to 4 not having delayed laydown iframes versus 4U. Like that in and of itself is, I don't want to fight Yangaruga, not low rank Yangaruga, without delayed get up.
It causes a world of difference.
Yeah. Okay. So Alpha and I recorded 8.5 hours worth of audio, and so I'm breaking it up into multiple parts. But I will be releasing the parts every 3 days. So please tune in, get ready for part 2, part 3, and part 4. Have a great day, guys. But before I let you go, shout out to my members. I can't do this without you guys. Special thanks to Akir, Funnel Loss, Monster Hunter, Sev for Short, Impulsive Veins, Mr. MH, El Mango. Thank y'all once again for helping me keep the lights on and my cats fed.
I've got dinner ready. Let him